What he just read for us is out of the 13th chapter of Romans, where Paul, Jesus' apostle, is telling the church at Rome to submit to the government. Now, who was the government? That was Rome. And what Paul said of that government and all governments is that they are ordained of God, that they are God's ministers. He uses the word diakonos, which is the same word from which we get the word deacon. So Paul is writing to the church at Rome saying the government is God's deacon and it's there to do you good. And so, after everything else, render to everyone, I'll just read it. Render to all what is due them. Tax to whom tax, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, and honor to whom honor. Whoever is due honor, render them honor. I never want to get in this pulpit and preach simply from a standpoint of patriotism or national pride. That's not the place for the pulpit of the Lord. The pulpit's for the gospel. But recently, what we have seen with ball players and others kneeling during our national anthem is, I think, an outgrowth of a failure for us to understand this principle right here. Render honor where honor is due. And we know it starts in the home. There is a concept that has pervaded our culture for the last several decades, and that concept is, I call it casualism. I thought casual, that's an interesting word, because I like casual. I like when I can go home and I can be someplace and the idea is to be casual and I can dress casually. Who doesn't like to dress casually? I love it. PJs, sweatpants, it's like going to Walmart, whatever. I did a little research on the English word casual. The word in our English, casual, comes from a Latin word that means accidental. And when you think about it, it makes sense. Casual, it's accidental, it's not intended. I know a lot of us intend to be casual sometimes, but the idea is that it's not that there is any purpose to it, it's just whatever was. And that's kind of the way it is in our culture. Whatever you want to believe, however you want to see things, you don't have to give anybody honor if you don't want to, because it's all important about how you see things. And it seems like so many times in our culture, the people who are honored with the greatest of honors are celebrities. And you got to wonder why. I admire celebrities. I go to the movies too, and I watch movies. Wow, that was a great movie, a great picture. But I like the idea of actors that Charlton Heston had. I don't know if you ever read this, but his son was supposed to go to school one day and make a report about the work that his dad did. All the kids in the class were supposed to do that. And so his son was talking to him about what he was supposed to report on his dad's work, Charlton Heston, of course. If you don't know who Charlton Heston is, he's one of the greatest Hollywood actors that's ever been, as far as I'm concerned. But he is an actor. And he told his son, you tell him this, son, you tell your teacher and you tell your students, your friends, I make a living by pretending to be other people. That's what he did. And that's what an actor does. And somehow in our culture, people who pretend to be other people have been set on a pedestal and they're just followed as if they can say or do no wrong. And that wouldn't be so bad, except that at the same time, things that really should be honored are not being honored. When you think of the word casual, what has that word been associated with so much in the last couple decades? Casual sex. Anybody else think of that? That pop into your mind? Now, you don't have to raise your hand. I know you'll probably be embarrassed. I don't want people thinking I think about sex, but when I said the word casual, probably a lot of you thought, oh, casual sex. Yeah, that's what's happened in our culture. What is sex in the mind of God? It's a sacred thing. He gave us that for procreation, number one, and when you read 1 Corinthians 7, you realize He gave us that for pleasure. But He gave us that sacred pleasure within the confines or the borders of marriage. And we pulled that out of God's sacred place and we've made it in our culture something that's no longer profound. It once was. But not just the act of sex, sex itself, male or female, has become rather casual. You can be what you want to be. I was looking, I got a letter from the VA. I used to think, well, there's nothing more macho than being in the military. And on the list of new services they had, one of the new offices of service was for LGBTQ. I can't remember all the letters now, but you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. And I wonder, what business does our government have there? But that's because that's where our culture has gone. Shouldn't surprise us. This is the world, after all. But we've been spoiled, haven't we, in the last 200 plus years in this country, because this country was originally founded by men who, in their knowledge of what they were up against, went to God. And when you read our Declaration of Independence, our National Declaration of Independence, 4 times in that declaration they mention the God of the Bible. And so this nation was founded on those principles. I mean, if you saw that in any other nation's founding document, you would say, oh, that nation is a nation that is a Christian nation. And not a Judeo-Christian, because these guys weren't Jewish. They were Christians. They were believers in God. And as much as you hear these days about people who are trying to counter that and say, well, they weren't really Christians. Jefferson, he just tore things out of the Bible. He didn't want, no. You go back and you research what Jefferson did with the Bible, and everything he did with the Bible, with the Gospels, was for the purpose of promoting the gospel story. He gave the gospel to the Indians, and he talked about, in our government, he set up standards by which the government would pay to put the gospel of Christ before the eyes of the native peoples of this country. He took excerpts from the Gospels. He didn't cut out parts of the Gospel. He took excerpts from the Gospel on the teachings of Christ, and he gave those with government money to all members of Congress, so that they would be able to read the teachings of Christ and his moral teachings and see how this nation ought to be directed and how it ought to be guided. We've got trouble in this country. Why is it? I think it's because there is a failure to honor things that ought to be honored. I mentioned it starts in the home. If we go back to what God teaches us about the home, this is what he says in Exodus chapter 20. Look with me at Exodus 20. This is one of the places where you'll read the 10 Commandments. Want to read about the 10 Commandments? Go to Exodus 20. You'll see in the 10 Commandments what I'm talking about here. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be prolonged in the land which the Lord your God gives you. That's an interesting statement. There's no difficulty in understanding what he means when he says, honor your father and your mother. Is there? That's pretty clear. And then he says, it comes with a promise. If you honor your father and your mother, your days are going to be long in the land I'm going to give you. So honoring father and mother is associated with long life. I knew that was true because my parents would kill me if I didn't show the right kind of honor growing up. That's just the way it was. But that's the deal. You see, this passage is not in the Bible so that parents can take it to their children and say, now little, do we have any kids named Susie? Okay, little Susie, I don't want Susie getting a complex. So you read this and you'll know you're supposed to do this. That's not the way it's supposed to work. The way it's supposed to work is the parents read this. You say, oh, God says it is right for my children, so right that he commands it to be done, that my children honor me. That means as a parent, I must constantly and consistently teach my children to honor me. That's what a father must do. That's what a mother must do. Now, sometimes when our children misbehave, we think it's so cute. Oh, isn't it cute? They're misbehaving. Now, I have to admit, sometimes it is. We've had 3 kids. It's cute sometimes when your kids misbehave. But when your children cross the line and fail to give you honor as a parent, you need to do something about it. You need to take steps. Number one, God says so. Number two, God says it's associated with long life. Do you want your children to live a long time? Teach them to honor you. Number three, if we don't learn to honor our parents, it's hardly likely that we're going to learn to honor anybody else. It starts at home. It's in the Ten Commandments. Teach and train your children, parents, to honor you. That's not being arrogant. That's not being uppity. If your children don't learn honor for you, they probably won't learn it for anybody else. And I really think that's what's happened in our nation. So many families, so many parents have failed to teach their children to honor them. Sometimes they fail because they fail to live honorably themselves. And it's hard to teach your children to have honor for you when you do not live honorably yourself. And I think what's happening with this kneeling for the flag junk, that's just a symptom of an overall situation that has come in our country because we have failed to give honor where honor is due. Another place where we sometimes fail to give honor, where we shouldn't, is honor to our older people. Look in Leviticus chapter 19. It might seem like kind of an odd place to find it, Leviticus. But Leviticus is one of the 5 books of law. 5 books of law. We call it the Pentateuch. The Jews call it the Torah. But it's Leviticus chapter 19 and verse 32. You can read it for yourself. He says, "You shall rise up before the gray-headed and honor the aged. You shall revere your God. I am the Lord." Now that's quite a couple of statements. You shall, says, don't you think about it, don't you consider it. You may, no, you shall rise up before the gray-headed. As I teach you, God might say, to give honor to your parents, I'm teaching you to give honor to anybody who is aged. I remember being taught that as a kid. No matter what you're doing, an older person comes in the room, you stand up. You get off your bottom. You get off the couch. If they want to speak to you, you speak to them. You stand in front of them, you look them in the eye, and you speak to them. Turn off the TV if you need to. Quit playing whatever you're doing. Give honor. Did I do it right all the time? No, because I'm a stupid kid. But I knew what I was taught. I knew what was right. And I fear that too many young people in our world, in our culture, do not even know what is right and probably think the more right thing to do is to show them that you're a free spirit and you're going to do whatever you want to do and nobody's going to hold you under their thumb. But God is saying this is what you shall do. You shall stand up before the gray-headed and honor the aged. And then in association with that, he says you're going to revere your God. You see the connection? Is that in there by accident? He tells us to rise up and honor the aged, and at the same time, almost in the same breath, he says, revere your God. I'm the Lord. To me, that says stand up and take notice. Don't just stand up, but stand up and take notice. What else does he say? Proverbs chapter 22. Now this one doesn't use the word honor, but the concept is there. Proverbs 22, verse 28. Do not move the ancient boundary which your fathers have set. You know what a boundary marker is? If you've ever bought or sold property, you know that you have to hire somebody. What are those guys called? Surveyors. What's a surveyor do? He surveys. He comes out with all of his precision instruments and he stands at one point and he looks through that little scope. When I was a kid, I was fascinated by that. That's cool. I wonder if he's got crosshairs in that thing. And he measures and he drives a steel stake in the ground so that, is it steel or is it iron? I don't know what it's made of, but he drives a metal stake in the ground to mark this is the point right here and we're going to measure off of this point. And nobody buys a piece of property that just looks regular. It's all in weird shapes. I don't know if you've noticed that or not. It's all in weird shapes. That's why we have to have surveyors, because nobody wants to lose a foot of ground to anybody. Going to have a surveyor come out, survey this place, so we'll know. And once those markers are in place, you better not mess with them. And God says, through his servant Solomon, don't you dare move those landmarks. By the way, who put those landmarks in place? The fathers. No, if there's first honor for the father, if there's honor for the father, you don't have to say anything about the landmarks because you think to yourself, oh, there's a landmark. Oh, our fathers put that in place. I honor our fathers. I'm not messing with that landmark. Now, somehow I don't think God was just talking about property boundaries. What kind of landmarks are there? My parents put down some landmarks for me. Every rule they taught me, every concept they taught me was like a landmark, a boundary. Yes, sir. No, sir. Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. That's a landmark. That's a boundary. You better not go beyond that. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. And then you stick with that. And in the practice of it, you learn honor, you learn respect, and in the practice of it, here's an interesting thing I found in my life. The more of that you give to others, the more of it comes back to you. So if you're finding in your life that you don't feel like you're getting much honor, you're not getting much respect, maybe what we need to do is take a look at ourselves and ask, am I acting honorably? Am I behaving respectfully? Because it's like God says with everything else, as you sow, so shall you reap. Still in Proverbs, this is an interesting one, chapter 27. And once again, the word honor is not here, but this is what Solomon says in Proverbs 27, verse 10. He says, do not forsake your own friend. And probably we would look at that and say, well, duh, he's my friend. I'm not going to forsake my own friend. But then he says this, or your father's friend. What does that say? Do not forsake your own friend, but don't forsake your father's friend. My dad had relationships with other men, and I remember as a young man thinking how neat that was because the stuff they did. One friend my dad had, his name was Bob Ballard, and Bob lived just a couple houses down from us, about a half a mile, and he liked to hunt and fish, and I remember he had this old Willys Jeep. It was I don't remember what the name of it was, but it was one of those Willys Jeeps that was enclosed in the back. It was like a big outdoor-looking station wagon. And they had a camp up in Doddridge County, West Virginia, and we were going up there, and I was 7 or 8 years old. I don't remember how old, but I was just small enough that they could say to me, get in the back and sit on the fender, sit on the wheel well. And that's what I did. That was the worst ride I've ever had in my life. But that weekend was the best time. I look back and I think, wow, I was with men. And they treated me like I was one of them, as young as I was. And we went squirrel hunting, and I still remember Bob cooked, and he cooked this stuff. It looked like sloppy joes, but there was no bread. It was just sloppy joes on a plate, and fried potatoes and something else that was green. And I remember thinking, that's the best meal I've ever had. My mom was a great cook. But somehow that whole thing comes together for me to say, Bob wasn't my friend, he was my dad's friend, but I'm not supposed to forget about Bob. And all the people who were my father's friends, my mother's friends, those are people I should also give honor. And I found it's a great pleasure now to give honor to those people, and when I got to do it before, because a lot of those folks are dead and gone now. But it was a pleasure for me to do that because treating them with honor and respect was like being able to treat my parents with honor and respect again. So I don't know exactly how all this works, but I know this is what God says. Don't forsake your own friend and don't forsake your father's friend. Very interesting idea there to me. In Matthew chapter 5, another thing we're supposed to honor is our own word. Matthew 5, this is the Sermon on the Mount. And once again, the word honor is not here. But we know what honor means, and that's what Jesus is teaching us. Matthew chapter 5, verse 33. Again, you've heard it said, or you've heard the ancients were told, you shall not make false vows, but shall fulfill your vows to the Lord. And you know how we say that in our present vernacular. We talk about honoring your word. You said it. Are you going to honor it? You made a commitment. You going to honor that commitment? That's how we say it. Because if you fail to follow through, you fail to honor what you have said. And Jesus is saying, you make a vow, you keep that vow, except I want to go a step farther. Verse 34, he says, I say to you, make no oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by earth, for it is the footstool of his feet, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Nor shall you make an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Wouldn't that be great if we could? You think these cook boys have hair? If I could say something and have hair, man, I wouldn't need any 3D camouflage. I'd go out there in the woods and I'd look like Absalom, man. But what Jesus says is so true. I don't have any power over my own head. We talk about sometimes how little control we have. Well, duh. Yeah, think about it. What do you have control over? I don't even control myself sometimes. So little control we have. But God says this to us through his Son Jesus. He says, let your statement be yes, yes, or no, no. Anything beyond these is of evil. The one thing we can control is following through with what we say. And so he says to us, it's not about vows. It's not about saying, I vow that I'm going to do this. It's about you being so honorable in your word every single day and in every single word you speak that if somebody hears you say it, you know you're going to follow through with it. And you don't have to promise. You don't have to swear. You just say it. And people know if you're a person of honor, then you will honor your word. And you will keep what you say. And that's what Jesus wants of all of us. He doesn't want us to be the kind of people that other people would have to say, well, did they say this or not? You say, well, they said it. Well, but did they swear to it? You don't want anybody thinking, oh, if they didn't swear to it, I'm not sure. You want people going, well, if he said it, it's going to happen. 1 Peter chapter 3. Let's talk about another area of honor that God leads us to. 1 Peter chapter 3. Now keep in mind, if you read this letter all by itself and you look for the context of 1 Peter, I think you're going to find the same thing I found, and that is that Peter was writing to people saying, this is how you behave in order to bear up under persecution. Peter keeps coming back time and time and time again in these 5 chapters about the church being persecuted, the fiery trial that they're about to undergo. But in this letter about bearing up under persecution, he says this. In the first 6 verses of chapter 3, he talks to the wives. He says, in the same way, you wives, be submissive to your own husbands, so that even if any of them are disobedient to the word, they may be won without a word by the behavior of their wives. What's he saying? He's saying, you wives, even if your husbands are disbelievers, there might be scumbag reprobates. Can you say scumbag from the pulpit? I just did, didn't I guess? You honor him. You honor him. You be submissive to him. As they observe your chaste and respectful behavior, your adornment must not be merely external, braiding the hair and wearing gold jewelry or putting on dresses, but let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the imperishable quality of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is precious in the sight of God. So he talks about women honoring their husbands, and he says this is the way. If you've got a husband that's a reprobate, if you're going to win your husband, this is how you're going to do it. It's interesting to me that Peter doesn't write to the women who are members of the church talking about their husbands who are not and say, here's what you do. You nag him every day about his lack of spirituality. You nag him because he doesn't go to church. You bring up the fact that he's never done this or never done that. He doesn't say that. He says, you behave as a Christian, and your Christian behavior. And by the way, if you've got a husband that's not a believer and you talk to him about the scriptures, that's not nagging. But you might ask him sometime what he thinks is nagging. The main thing is to be honorable towards him. But get down to verse 7. This is where he says to the husbands, you husbands, in the same way, live with your wives in an understanding way, as with someone weaker, since she is a woman, and show her honor as a fellow heir of the grace of life, so that your prayers will not be hindered. Husbands, don't just love your wives, honor your wives. And whatever you want to make, and whatever we want to make of this idea of the weaker vessel, the bottom line is honor. He says, live with her in an understanding way. Now tell me that's not a tall order for us men. Try to understand a woman. But God says, this is what I want you to do. And if you're going to honor me, you're going to honor her, and you're going to do it according to knowledge, to understanding. I think too many times, maybe with girls, but especially with guys, once we get married, it's like, okay, I'm married now, I got her. Now I can go fishing. She'll be home when I get back, whatever. And don't we take each other for granted, especially in the first stages, perhaps, of marriage? We have the romance. It starts in the beginning, and it's all great, and it kind of climaxes at the wedding. And from there, it's all about decisions we make, isn't it? It's all about decisions we make, whether to honor the one we've chosen or not. That's what it's all about. When the writer of the Hebrew letter gets to what we call the last chapter, he says this in Hebrews chapter 13. Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 4. Marriage is to be held in honor among all. Now, how can you honor marriage if you don't honor your wife? Or if you don't honor your husband? Is it possible to honor marriage without honoring your wife or your husband? I think it's just kind of written into it. Marriage is to be held in honor among all, and the marriage bed is to be undefiled. For fornicators and adulterers, God will judge. Any of that going on in our culture? The only reason that happens is because we fail to honor the way God says to honor. What's the result of our deciding to honor things the way God wants to honor things? Well, let's close with John chapter 12 and verse 26. John 12, 26. We've looked at several things this morning God says to honor, considered how to go about honoring, but this is what Jesus says about it. John 12, 26. By the way, you hear that sound? You hear those pages turning? That's a fantastic sound. It's almost as good as those little babies in our midst. Those are pages turning too, by the way. If anyone serves me, Jesus says, he must follow me. And where I am, there my servant will be also. For if anyone serves me, what's going to happen? The Father will honor him. If we follow Jesus, and he's not talking about getting on the road with him and going either to Damascus or Jerusalem or Bethlehem or wherever he's walking to. That's not what he's talking about. He says, if anybody follows me, what's that mean? You do my will. You hear my word, and you carry it out. You honor that by doing what I say. And Jesus says, if you follow me, you honor me in this way, God will honor you. I don't know about you, but when that last trumpet sounds, I want to be honored by God. How about you? That's what I'm looking for. What's going to happen? For that to happen, I'm going to have to do some honoring along the way. And so I encourage you this morning as brothers and sisters in Christ, as the Lord's church, as His body here at Choctaw, let's show the world in spite of themselves what it means to give honor where honor is due. We're going to stand and sing a song of encouragement and invitation. And if you've not yet submitted yourself to the Lord, then you've not yet honored Him the way He wants you to. If you need the prayers of this congregation, we will honor your desire for our prayers. We'll pray for you until everything is resolved one way or the other. So we ask you to let us know how we can help as we stand together and invite you to respond.